Gang. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Night school.
Night school. So, I read about Miyamoto Musashi.
Dude, I'm so excited because normally I kind of know what you're going to talk about. Like, we've talked about it a little. I have no idea what this is.
Yeah. I've heard of it through Joe Rogan, mostly. He's referenced that, like, he has read Miyamoto Musashi's books and that they were really influential on him and, like, particularly on martial arts and, like, because he follows sort of a warrior-esque path, at least when he was younger and he was, like, actively doing fighting. But there's a lot of stuff that's, of course, applicable to other things. Mm-hmm. I didn't originally start reading this book. I told you I started reading a book about, like, the sacred ark, the Ark of the Covenant, and it's like about the Philosopher's Stone and alchemy and like how, like what's in the Ark and that sort of stuff. And I couldn't get through it. It was pretty rough. It was like it was slow, and there was a lot of references to like biblical stories that I don't really completely know. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like as I was reading it that I should really know the mainstream history of this before I read like the fringe thing, because that feels kind of fraudulent to like not even know the story, but being like, now you guys don't. Now I'm going to tell you guys the real story. So I feel like maybe I need to like read Exodus and the other what's Ezekiel, the other things it's referencing,
and some Jungian alchemy shit, right? Because I don't even know what alchemy is. Do you know what alchemy is?
I know some of it. Yeah, it's like about transmutation, trying to turn one thing into other things. Oftentimes it was about trying to turn base metals into gold. There's a big part of it that was about like trying to find the fountain of youth, or the Philosopher's Stone is said to do like almost anything. The Philosopher's Stone is just a cheat code to let you do anything. You can live forever, or you can turn anything into anything. I didn't get far enough to totally get into it, but supposedly like you could turn gold into a Philosopher's Stone. But it was all about, it's basically science. It's basically just science, but really early stuff where they were trying to turn stuff into other stuff.
Or like early science with a naive goal that we never ended up figuring out, and we did other science stuff instead.
Yeah, it's very like magic-y science. It's very esoteric. It's all related to occult stuff.
Yeah.
But I increasingly think that like a lot of scientific stuff even now is related to stuff that is more esoteric, like people getting technological ideas from intelligences that aren't human, things like that. So it's probably not all that different to what's going on now. And I'll come back to that because I am interested in alchemy and I'm interested in what it has to say. The reviews on Amazon were surprisingly good. I thought it was people were just gonna mock it, but anyway.
Only weirdos would read it, so.
That is true. Yeah. Yeah. So I ended up, me and Sarah, before we went on our trip, we went to Barnes & Noble, and I found this book on sale, and I had heard of it through Rogan, so I decided to read this, and this was really cool. So I read this on the trip. And this book talks about, it gives like a lot of history about Miyamoto Musashi's life, as well as like the text of the main three things that he wrote. The most popular thing is usually referred to as 5 rings. If you've heard of it, that would be the name that you've heard of it under. He translates it as the Way of 5 Spheres, I think. And that is just like it breaks down all of his ideas about combat and about life and how someone should carry themselves. And he wrote another text earlier that was like basically like a rough draft of that book that ended up being like his magnum opus, the 5 Rings book. That ended up being the thing that people mainly know him for.
What's magnum opus?
That is, I'm trying to think of like what, I don't know the actual translation, but it's like, this is my big work, my great work, the great work of my life. That's what people say when they say magnum opus.
Cool.
And then the last thing that he wrote, which was like days before he died, was a thing called The Path Walked Alone, and it's like a 2-page thing, which I'll read later, that just like goes over really like 20 bullet points of everything that he would tell someone if they wanted to live like him, which is pretty cool. I want to open it by reading the part of the intro to the 5 Spheres book. Having trained for many years, for the first time I have thought to explain it in writing. Now, near the beginning of the 10th month of the 20th year of Kane, I have climbed Mount Iwado in Higo, Kyushu. Here I have exalted heaven, bowed down before the Bodhisattva canon, and now face the Buddha. Born in Harima, I am Shinmen Musashi no Kami Fujiwara no Genshin, a warrior. I am 60 years of age. Starting in my youth long ago, I set my heart on following the path of warfare. At 13, I fought my first bout. My opponent was a warrior of the Shinto style called Arima Kihei, and I defeated him. At age 16, I struck down a powerful fighter known as Akiyama of Tajima. At 21, I went up to the capital, where I encountered many famous swordsmen, and even though I engaged in numerous duels, never once was I unable to achieve victory. Following that, I went on to various regions and places, and met with the practitioners of different styles. Although I fought in 60-odd matches, never did I lose. All of this happened between the ages of 13 and 28 or 9. When, sometime after I turned 30, I thought back over my past, I realized that I had not won all those bouts because I had achieved great levels of strategic skill. It could have been because I had some innate gift for this path, and thus did not get away from its natural principles, or because those other styles of swordsmanship were lacking in some respect. After seeing this, in order to attain the deeper principles, I set myself to training day in and day out. In due course, I realized the way of strategy. This was when I was about 50 years old. And I really liked that, because I think it's interesting that, like, he goes over all these battles that he won, all these fights that he won, 60 duels, and he won all of them, and he killed all these people. And then when he turns 30, he looks back and he's like, oh, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. I was lucky. I was just genetically predisposed to this, and I got lucky all this time. And when he turns 30, he starts getting serious and starts training. And yet, through all that, despite the fact that he trained harder than anybody, it's not until he's 50 that he feels like he actually has anything figured out. Mm-hmm. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's wild.
So, I want to basically tell you some of the history of his life. He was born in 1584 in Japan. He was born in a city called Miyamoto Sonoma, which is apparently where he gets the name. I don't know how that naming structure works exactly, but that's where since he was born there, he was named that. His father was named Munasai, and he was a jita expert. And a jita is it's a defensive weapon meant for disarming people. It looks like a sai, like Raphael the Turtle's weapon, but only with one of the sort of side pieces. So it's like just a stick, but with like a little hook on the side of it. And so it's used for like getting swords out of somebody else's hand.
Wow.
And that's what he learned when he was young. His parents divorced when he was a kid. His dad left, and he ended up getting raised at a Buddhist temple by his uncle for a lot of his life. For when he was a kid. So Buddhism was important to him when he was growing up, and Buddhism ends up being a big part of his life for his whole life. He ends up at temples many times. When he was 12, he fought his first battle, which he mentioned here. He said that this guy was arrogant and skillless, and he beat him to death. Like in most of these duels, they get killed.
That's crazy.
Like. I guess we talked about this during when we were talking about John Chang's stuff, but it's wild that so much knowledge would have gotten lost because probably that guy would have learned a lot and he would have been a really good sword fighter by the time he was 60, but instead he fights at 12 and it's like, oh, he's dead. He was because he was arrogant and didn't know what to do.
Fucking arrogant 12-year-olds, kill him.
That is kind of crazy. Yeah, he's described as being arrogant and skillless, but we're talking about a little kid. Of course he is. At 15, he left his home. He fought another guy, and that ended up being a really noteworthy battle because he was like a kind of a prodigy from another sword school somewhere. Now at 15, dead. When he was 16, his family was in service to a clan called Tokugawa, and so he was expected to fight for that clan. And so he and his father ended up fighting together when he was 16 in a battle. And he fights many battles throughout his life, ends up surviving all of those, and writes quite a bit about like military strategy in addition to just dueling strategy.
Oh, so he fought in wars too.
Yeah.
Not just fights to the death for fun.
Yeah, he did plenty of fights to the death for fun, but plenty of wars too.
Wow.
He ends up becoming friends with so many nobles and stuff that want him to fight for different things, and he's just down, usually for money.
Yeah.
So from this time on, he spends a lot of time just sort of traveling around. He's a wandering Ronin, looking for people to fight, looking at training, getting better and better, and looking for people to prove he's better than. It's hard to even say learn from, because it's like it's not even really like a learning exercise. It is for one of them, but that's not that much learning if like 50% of the people die. He went and fought some famous brothers that ran a dojo, embarrassed both of them, killed them, ended their dojo. He traveled to the top of a mountain to fight some spear experts, beat them too. When he was 22, at this point it's kind of interesting because he's running a sort of school when he's 22, although he later reflects on that and thinks he had absolutely no idea what he was doing at that point. But he wrote the first thing that he ever wrote, which was called Mirror to the Way of Strategy, and it's not included here. He probably wouldn't want it to be included here because he probably think it sucks.
Mm-hmm.
The school that he was running at that time was called the Circle of Brightness style. And it was about fighting with two swords, shuriken throwing, and use of the jitta, which we assume he got from his dad.
Mm-hmm.
He, after founding that school, he fought a guy that was a chain and sickle expert. So that I looked that up. It's like a comma. I remember a comma, like a small sickle.
Yeah. But
there's a chain on the end of the butt end of the comma, and then like a ball on the other one, and then there's like an 8-foot chain or something like that. So the idea is they would like spin the ball end, throw it at someone to try and like wrap them up in it, and then run in and hit them with the sickle.
Jeez.
But it was like all one attached thing.
When you said psi earlier, I was picturing a comma. That's why I was confused. I was trying to picture it.
Do you know what I'm talking about by psi though?
Now I know what you're talking about. It's like a long knife, but sometimes it's just a point on the end. Sometimes it's not even bladed on the side. And then it has two forks.
Yeah,
one
two
fork
like
on each side.
That kind of shaped thing on the side. Yeah.
Electra.
Yes, exactly, Electra. So he goes to fight this guy with the chain and sickle, and the reports of this fight are that what he did was he was known for fighting with a long sword in his right hand and a short sword in his left hand. And that was typically how he fought. Although he talks a lot about how you need to be open to using different weapons at different times, and he was an expert in a lot of other weapons too. But he takes his short sword and does like a bit to mock him, and he spins his short sword above his head and then throws it at him, stabs him in the chest, and kills him immediately. So he doesn't even come close to the guy. He just spins, doing a bit, throws his sword, kills him like that.
Jeez.
He fought. Then he traveled and he fought some guys from the New Shadow style, which sounds very ninja-ish. It involves like
only wannabe ninjas.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, apparently they weren't all that good. They used short swords, and their idea was just to be very quick. Now he talks. There's a part in 5 rings or 5 spheres. 5 spheres is kind of broken up into 5 different scrolls. And the scrolls are named Ground, Water, Fire, Wind, and Emptiness. So it's the same kind of like Chinese ideas of like all of the elements.
Yeah.
Which emptiness or void is often tacked on to the end of that.
Yeah.
Surprisingly across like different cultures. It's not like just one idea, but it's like nothingness as an element.
Yeah.
And in the 4th scroll, Wind, he talks a lot about different schools and what he found lacking about them. And so he does kind of reference the New Shadow guys there, because he discusses like there are certain schools where their idea is to use very short swords and just attempt to be quicker than the other person. But he sort of mocks that idea as not being a good idea because he says speed has never been important. What's important is rhythm and knowing when is the right time to strike rather than just as soon as possible.
Right.
Which I thought was funny because it made me think of like some rappers where like they value like I'm such a fast rapper,
Right.
which is like not a good thing if you're not on the rhythm.
Right.
If you don't know where the rhythm is, then it doesn't. You can say something really fast, but like that's not entertaining. It's not good.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. So he beat those guys easily. He went and fought some staff experts, and that battle is remembered as being like especially close. And some reports say that it was basically a draw between the two of them. And the staff expert actually survived it.
Jeez.
It was very close. They seemed to be mutually respecting of each other. And afterwards, that staff expert went on to found like a school of staff fighting that specifically had like forms that they studied for how to deal with people that fight with two swords. So it was like kind of a direct nod to Musashi's fight with him.
Wow. I can't believe all this shit is real.
Yeah, this is what this guy was up to.
Crazy.
And at this point, he's like 25 or something. Then he goes to a temple for some time where he studies Zen and koans, which we've talked about koans before. I looked up the comments earlier because we had referred to it as quanta at some point, and then Willie corrected us in the comments that what we're talking about is
koans.
Koans, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, koans. And the only
Don't comment, Willie. We figured it out. They're not cones.
The only example I know of a koan, just to give some context, is what's the sound of one hand clapping.
Yeah.
Koans are just the idea of questions that you can't answer that make you furrow your brow and think really hard. And
questions that make you grasp the infinite as a result of realizing why it is that you can't answer the question.
Exactly. Yeah. So he was really into that, and he studied that a lot. And there's specifically a lot of references to Zen and Zen Buddhism, and that was a lot of the temples that he was traveling to.
Mm-hmm.
When he was 28, he fought his most famous battle. That was with a guy named Kojiro. Now, at this time, it was presented that he was well known at this time as being obviously a really formidable fighter, but he was also known as being like kind of a very odd guy in the way he dressed and the way he presented himself. He was like disheveled, and he didn't seem to care about keeping a neat appearance or anything like that. Mm-hmm. He was fine just looking like a mess all the time. And he would sometimes he would fight with just whatever was around. Like that was what he was known for, that he could pick something up and he could beat you with whatever stick on the ground he found.
Jeez.
So he spent a lot of time thinking about koans and Zen, and while he was there, the people from that temple ended up setting up this fight with this guy Kojiro. Kojiro was similarly famous at the time. He was known as an excellent fighter, but was very different in the way that he presented himself. He was very neat. He was very professional. He was very proper kind of guy.
So you're saying our guy was the proper one, and Kojiro, the opponent, was the disheveled one?
No, our guy's the disheveled one.
Oh,
our
wow.
guy doesn't give a shit what he looks like. He just lets himself.
And he would sometimes fight with random objects.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And the story of him fighting Kojiro is that he shows up on a boat because they set up the fight on like a tiny island. They set up a little fight island, and he shows up on a boat, and he shows up with a sword that he carved on the way there out of an oar from the boat.
Jesus.
So he shows up with a wooden sword which may have been an attempt to kind of mock him or throw him off guard, because he does reference that like he's certainly not above that strategy. He'll do things like yelling just to throw people off, or he'll just do things to try and be intimidating or to embarrass or annoy people. He likes doing that. He thinks it's a valuable strategy to use.
Mm-hmm.
So he showed up there with a shitty wooden sword that he had just made, basically a stick. And Kojiro was known for fighting with an especially long sword. The swords, best I can figure, the swords that Musashi used, the long sword he refers to as katana is like 2.5 feet long, something like that. The short sword, which he calls wakizashi, he is like 1.5 feet, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
This guy Kojiro is known for using an extremely long sword, somewhere beyond 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And Musashi talks about that type of fighter as well in the Wind Scroll. He refers to people that use an especially long sword and like how dumb he thinks that is, because obviously the benefit of a really long sword is that you have a longer reach, so you can not get as close, which he mocks as being like, clearly someone that wants to fight with a long sword wants to stay away, so it shows that like they're already weak. They already are like too scared to get close to somebody, and so they want to try and be like extra safe with their super long sword.
Right.
And the story is that when he showed up there with the mockery sword, that Kojiro was really pissed off about that, and he took his sword out and he threw his scabbard into the ocean, like the sheath. And Musashi mocks him, like, the only guy that's going to throw their sheath into the ocean is a guy that knows he's not going to need it soon. Woo! Yeah. And the story is that it is close, and that he like ends up getting his pants cut by the long sword, but then he ends up just hitting him 2 times in the face with the wooden sword, knocking him down. And then it's not clear if he died, if like he just beat him to death immediately, but he died that day. It might have been shortly after, but he beat him to death with a wooden sword.
Jesus.
And this was like a famous guy, and that really made him especially famous. So that made him legendary from there.
Yeah.
And this is around the same time, he's 28 when he did this, so this is around the same time that he ends up looking back and going, wait, I didn't know what I was doing at all. So it may have been like that battle was pretty close, and that it made him think that like, maybe I should rethink this and actually start getting serious about training.
Right.
Because like that long sword could have just killed me right there. Also, he was like using a joke sword, which is like, he's really just being an asshole.
Yeah.
Not taking anything seriously.
Mm-hmm. But maybe that's why he won, because he approached it in such a ridiculous way.
Yeah.
I think it could also like shift your mindset into being more confident. If you choose to do something that's disadvantageous,
Yeah.
the confidence that you gain from making that choice, and like when you're humorous, it seems like you call forth more of your will. You know, like capital W, like that essence.
Yeah.
When you joke around, there's more of your will present. There's more of you. Whereas if you show up all seriously, you might just be like going through the motions, because formality isn't conscious. You know, formality is
structure.
Like, it's just structure. You know, like I've been thinking about Elon Musk so much. I loved that Twitter rant that he went on. He's like rage against the dying of the light of consciousness. It's all capped and it's all strange. Like,
yeah.
To be able to get weird like that is a superpower.
Yeah.
And it makes you smarter and more creative. And I think he's saying it in such a ridiculous way to illustrate the point that he's making, which is that you need to be willing to step out of the lines to accomplish anything genuinely creative, genuinely of consciousness, genuinely of the will. Because anybody can go on Twitter and be like, Happy President's Day to all of the great men who have served, and it's just like, you know, it doesn't require you.
You can just say the thing you're supposed to say.
Right.
Yeah.
And those samurai, they're just like showing up the way that they're supposed to show up to a duel. Like, show up, like, got my clothes right, okay, I'm a samurai. They look in the mirror before they go, they're like, okay, I look like a samurai. They show up, and so it's like, you're not going to define the space that you're in if the space that you're in defines you.
Totally. I want to show you, I have a self-portrait that he painted. By the way, he's also deeply into art and painting and calligraphy and sculpting and gardening and all kinds of different things. He studies a lot of different things, but that's how he viewed himself in his 50s. Which, I mean, I guess he looks pretty put together there. But if you're gonna paint yourself, I'm sure.
I really don't have enough cultural context to know if that's a put together guy or not. You know what I mean?
Like this might look like a homeless man, and we have no idea.
I don't know.
It might.
I don't know the rules.
Although he does have tiny little baby hands, which is kind of funny.
Why did he give himself tiny little baby hands?
I don't know.
Just didn't know
Was
how to
this
draw
whole thing a
hands.
compensation? This whole career of fighting he had was all just like trying to make up for something?
You know, something I did feel when I was reading this is like I think he was short. I think he was like a little guy because he references a lot things like even a small man can become huge in spirit in the heat of battle. Like he says he says things that feel like they're meant to give hope to a small person, and that like it's not actually that much of a benefit to be big. So I think he was just like a little guy. So
Yeah.
you might, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. He also reminds me of Nietzsche a little bit. In the opening chapter of Beyond Good and Evil, by Nietzsche, he starts by roasting all of the different classes of philosophy. And he's trying to paint, I don't know what the hell he was trying to do, but when I read it, what he did for me was paint the picture of a philosopher who stood at the center of philosophy and didn't take any sides on it. Like a political analyst who's good could be like, here's what's wrong with this side, here's what's wrong with that side, here's what's wrong with this philosophy and that. And then it's like, okay, well, you get it. You get the whole picture because you can describe, you can critique and break apart every aspect of it. And it sounds like he's doing to the martial arts what Nietzsche was doing to the bodies of philosophy, the bodies of, is it called body of philosophy? Or is there another
It
word
might
for
just be
that?
philosophies, even
School.
schools of thought.
Yeah, the different.
Which is that's the same word that you use here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so if you're really the master of your craft, you should be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And he definitely I think that's a good comparison because it does seem like what he mocks in the Wind Scroll is places where he thinks that other schools of combat have gone too far in one direction. He feels like short sword and long sword, those are the things you mainly got to have. You got to have those two things, but you do also have to know other weapons and understand when a bow is going to be more useful, or a spear is going to be more useful, or a jitta, or a shuriken, or whatever it is. He felt that you needed to be willing to use all those tools, but where he felt like these schools were lacking was where they got so into one idea, speed or reach, or using ranged weapons, or when one of those schools went too far in one direction, that was when they fucked up. And he's trying to be more even.
Yeah.
And it was also very important to him to be, although training as a warrior, to also be evened out by interest in the arts and learning those sorts of things.
Right.
So he's very into balance in that way.
Yeah. Not getting caught up in a warrior complex and and try to. Doesn't sound like he was trying to be a warrior. Doesn't sound like he was playing a warrior. It sounds like he just was one.
Yeah. It does sound like he feels that he was just naturally talented for this. That's the only reason he ever made it to 30. And then luckily, since he could make it to 30, which almost nobody did, then he was able to actually become enlightened. Or that in Japan they have a word kensei, which means sword saint. And it's a word that's reserved for people that, through a deep understanding of combat, became enlightened or learned some greater truth about the universe through getting so good at combat. And they refer to him as a kensei, that he was enlightened through his combat.
That's hard.
Yeah. Let's see. When he was 30, he fought in another war, and and I think the previous time was just a single battle, but this was more of an ongoing campaign that he fought in, and ended up getting, because he was on the winning side of this war, ended up getting favor with the right lords and stuff, bettering his standing in society, basically. And during that war, fought mostly with a spear, or I think it's Naganaki or something like that. It's it's a sword, but it's a spear, but on the end it's an 8-inch katana blade instead of a typical spear point.
Yeah.
So it's a katana style spear.
I've seen that in the movie. I'm an expert on those.
Yeah, perfect.
Actually, not a movie. I'm thinking of Zelda. You had that one. I remember killing like boars. Like, boars that ran around on two legs.
Like in Wind Waker?
Yeah. That's what it was.
And you can totally take their spears, and they do have like sword blades on the end.
Yeah.
After that war, he became close with the Lord that he was fighting for. And the Lord saw in him stuff other than just being like a talented warrior, and hired him for years to be a city planner, to like design a city and like design certain gardens, and his input was just taken on other stuff and just being an advisor on city planning and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So he did that for years.
That's dope.
Assuming also he was like training at that time too. It doesn't seem like his training ever stopped.
Yeah.
As far as combat goes. In his 30s, he stopped killing people in duels. He apparently decided what we've decided, that that's an insane, barbaric thing to do. And from then on, whenever he fought duels, he fought with a wooden sword, although he didn't ask that of anybody else. So he just always fought with the wooden sword and never killed anybody again in single combat, only in wars.
Crazy.
In his 30s, he adopted a couple of kids named Mikinosuke and Iori. And it's not clear like where these kids came from. I assume they were like orphans, or maybe they were like people's kids and they like begged him to take them under his wing, that sort of thing. Although he didn't feel, well, I shouldn't say that, that's an assumption. He didn't train either of them in combat, which I don't know why that would be. It may have been that he just didn't see the gift in them, or maybe he didn't think it was a very healthy life and he would rather they not live this life, because it's probably not the best way to go. But so he raises them, and then he ends up basically taking both of these kids to be like classy servants of rich people. So they became, he like sort of gave them into the service of certain lordly families that he had been friendly with, to have them raised in like propriety, to like be proper and to be like politicians, basically. One of them, Mikinosuke, he was given to this lordly family, and the guy ended up dying. The lord ended up dying. And he was obliged to do seppuku. So he killed himself because the lord that he worked for died, because that was the rules at the time. It even seems like Musashi is okay with it. Like that just is what it is. And there's like, he like sort of travels to see his father before he has to seppuku, and they have like a feast. And the stories say that they never even talked about it. Like, he went to visit Musashi, and Musashi threw him a huge feast, knowing that, like, he's just about to go kill himself because his boss died, and they don't even talk about it. It's his duty. It is what it is, but we'll have one last party.
That's wild.
Very wild.
That is wild.
Iori did very well, though. Iori's lord did not die immediately, and not long after the first kid had to kill himself, they ended up outlawing that. So he was like one of the last ones that had to do it.
Just missed the mark.
Yeah. But the Iori ends up being raised well and having a big family. He does very well and becomes a rich guy. In, so 1634, at this point he is 50 years old. And so for the previous like 20 years, he's just been working with various lords, raising kids, going around dueling people, but never killing them anymore. Training people, I assume, running a school, that kind of stuff. When he's 50, he gets hired by one of the lords that he's associated with to go into battle with his son, who was untested. So it's a rich guy's kid is going to go fight in a battle, but he's never fought in a battle before. So he gets Musashi to go in with him to like watch his back. That way the kid can get like the fighting experience, but also not die, because Musashi's going to actually kill anybody if they get near him. He of course nails that, and that's the last time he ever fights. The last time he ever fights in a war. At that point, he's done with that too. In his 50s, he has a daughter with a prostitute, which is kind of interesting because like the picture of the guy doesn't seem like the type of guy that would go to prostitutes, but the culture was different at the time, and also at that place. Like it was like geishas are like a classy kind of prostitute. Like it's not a shameful thing. It's like a position of honor somehow. Different culture.
Yeah.
The daughter doesn't make it long, dies of some disease when she's very young, which might be because her mom was a prostitute. When he's 51, he gets invited by a lord, but he's like, this lord is higher than all the other lords that he's been friends with up to this point, like one of the most important people in Japan. His name was Hosokawa, and he had met him at some point earlier through a poetry circle. He was also a poet, and he met this guy through a poetry circle, and I guess they hit it off. Hosokawa sends a letter to Musashi and asks him to come live with him, and he would be like a guest of honor kind of thing. He takes like a year to make up his mind, but he does take him up on it, and he goes and lives with Hosokawa. And Hosokawa is like an extremely cultured person. He's very into painting and calligraphy and also into sword fighting. And they spend like 8 years together. It seems like they basically just become best buds, and they paint together and they do calligraphy together. And Hosokawa has like a sword fighting teacher, and he's like, hey, I want you to fight my sword fighting teacher. See how that goes. And of course he destroys the guy, and he's like, oh, okay, now fight me now too, fight me. And he destroys Hosokawa too, and they bond over that. They spend a ton of years together, and when he's 57, he writes the first of the 3 books that's in here, which is called 35 Articles on Strategy for Hosokawa. And Hosokawa dies a couple months later, so he ends up getting that back. And it reads as like a rough draft of 5 Rings, because it has all the same kind of ideas, because it's about his ideas about sword fighting. So it's a lot of the same ideas, but it's written like to a specific person. So when you read it, like sometimes it'll say like, if you have questions, we can talk about this in person, which is like, because it was just written for Hosokawa specifically when he was alive. So he's like,
wow,
here's basically what it is, but like maybe I can show you. That'll probably be easier.
Wow.
So that's still in there.
Right. It's really cool when a text is written for a specific audience, that it wasn't someone trying to speak broadly to whoever will read the book, because it does seem like there's something about writing something for the sake of publishing it that can end up distancing your attention from the individual who will hear it.
Totally.
And so there's something beautiful about like New Testament books are always like written by somebody to a specific group of people going through a specific series of things. It's like, hey, let me help you with that. Or man, there was another example of this recently. Oh, Marcus Aurelius. He didn't write it to be published, but he just kind of wrote it for himself, didn't he? Yeah,
it was just a reference for him, it seemed like. It didn't seem like anything was written for anybody else.
Right.
And so it is interesting kind of, reading into the different, like who the intended audience is, because that totally changes the structure of what it is that gets written.
Yeah.
And how much is like assumed that the person already, how much background is given.
Yeah.
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 So Hosokawa dies. And a couple years later, at 59, he's sick. And most people think that it was lung cancer is what it was that he actually had. And he spends those couple years hanging out between 2 different places, a place called Spirit Rock Cove, which allegedly had some kind of spiritual powers. It may be that he was going there to try and heal or something. I'm not sure. And a Buddhist Zen temple that he would frequent. So he would just kind of go between those 2 places. At 60, he climbs up a mountain and he writes the 5 Spheres, which was that intro that I read earlier. At that point, he's 60 years old. When he finishes it, he writes letters to several like rich people that he knows, or just people in general. And he writes letting them know that what he's going to do now is he's going to go into the mountains and he's just going to wait to die. That it's his time and he's going to go die now. He sends letters to some people from the Hosokawa clan, his old friend, and they send a couple of guys that say, oh, hell no, you're not. You're going to come live with us and you're going to be comfortable. We're not going to let you go live in the mountains. And apparently he doesn't fight that. And he goes and he stays with I don't know if they were the kids or the successors in some other way, but he goes and stays with the Hosokawa clan.
That's interesting.
Where his old friend lived, yeah.
It seems like someone this alpha would have been hard-headed about that. Like, no, I'm going to die the way I'm going to die.
Yeah, maybe he was. I don't know what exactly would have motivated him to go with them, because it does seem like independence was more important to him than anything, and he never, like all these lords and stuff that he's associated with, he never officially had a position with these people. They would give him money and they would like ask him to do certain things, but he was never like I'll do stuff, but I'm not like your guy.
Yeah.
Like he never wanted to be owned by anybody.
Yeah.
And he got enough money because of how talented he was at so many different things that he got enough money to be able to live his life like that. And the last book that he writes is The Path Walked Alone. It's very important to him to walk a path alone, to go through life the way he did.
Dude, I'm so excited to hear that. He's got like 20 principles to live by.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. So he goes and lives with the Hosokawa, and at 61, the next year, he calls all his friends together, all his students, and he gives all his stuff away. He has still the one copy of 35 articles on strategy, which he had written for Hosokawa. He gives that to his brother, who was never mentioned in the story until now. But he had a brother, and he gives it to him. And the copy that he had of 5 Rings he gave to his students. And in his last few days living, he wrote The Path Walked Alone. And then he dies. And he does say that he mentions in, I can't remember which of them, but he mentions in one of his books that there will be no gravestone dedicated to him, that he doesn't want to be noted. Although he does request that his hair be cut off and it buried by a certain tree. And then his body is buried elsewhere in warrior's armor. And although it seems like at first he did not have an elaborate gravestone, in the years following, his adopted son, who's now a very successful rich man, Iori, hires a famous poet to write an epitaph and design this elaborate gravestone for him. So his surviving adopted son ends up honoring him in that way, which is very cool. Yeah. And then now I'm going to just go through, I've got a few quotes here, and just talking points that I wanted to talk about, like things that were important to him.
Is this book, it's more story than philosophy, or pretty even?
So the most of this book is the 5 spheres, and I'll go through it. So the first, those were 5 different scrolls, and the first scroll is ground, and ground is sort of the introduction. It goes over sort of some of his broad ideas about the world and about the way. He talks about the way a lot, and it's the way it's translated, at least, it's always with a capital W when he's referencing the way.
Cool.
And he sees the way in everything. And like after he turned 50 and he figured shit out and he finally understood the way of things and like the way of strategy in terms of fighting, he says that after that point he never had to be taught the way of anything, that he could just see the way in everything.
Oh, that's cool.
And I think, I've thought about it a bit, and I think what he means by that is kind of like that he sees the rhythm in things, and that he sees that like there's a correct time for everything. And he talks about like with farmers, he understands that like, well, their way is knowing when it's going to be rainy and knowing what the weather's going to be and knowing how to handle that situation. and not trying to be forceful about it, but just sort of going with the flow and doing what the best thing is that you can do in that moment.
Yeah.
And so I feel like rhythm is a big part of it. He talks about rhythm a lot because it's not spelled out for you exactly what he means by the way and everything, but it seems like it's about being able to spot the advantages, or being able to shoot the gaps when you see the gaps, and when you see those gaps to not hesitate and to know exactly what to do when you see those gaps and be ready for them, be anticipating them, and to never second guess yourself. And so but he says that like he sees the way in painting. He sees like the correct way to paint, he sees the way in like warfare in terms of like large scale combat.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's really into that, and that's a lot of what the first scroll talks about, is just sort of this broad overview of like there is a way, and here's a little bit about like how I see the way in different things, and how I see the rhythms of life, which I guess I kind of think about as like similar to the astrological idea of there being a time for certain things.
Yeah.
And that you can't fight the time for things. You just have to know what to do when it's what time it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so ground covers a lot of that. The next scroll is water, and water talks a lot specifically about like his sword strategies. Like, and I didn't bother. I'm not going to bother quoting any of that because it's so technical, and it's so like he's just literally telling you. I want you to point the katana and wakizashi down to the left, and then as they strike down, to guide it up, and then slip in with the sword, and like just describing different specific moves, and like with these 5 moves, you can basically beat anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and something he talks about a bit in ground as well, in like introduction part, is that he feels like when he can just look somebody in the eye and defeat them. Because he can just, when he looks into somebody, he can like see their soul and he can understand what they're going to do. And it's just like, it's not even reactionary. He just like gets in touch with their rhythm and can just beat them and just get it. Yeah.
You know, I have fantasized about if I could ask Israel Adesanya a question, I would really want to know his take on the psychic element of fighting. Because he seems like he's vibrating so high that he would have some thoughts about that.
Interesting.
So interesting.
Because I thought about him a lot while I was reading this.
Yeah.
Because I know that and I don't really, what I know about him is mainly through you, but you've told me that he has a thing that he refers to as God mode.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that? What has he said about that exactly?
I don't remember any details.
Okay.
I remember like a montage video that talked about him having God mode and the Seahawk having beast mode. Sorry, I don't watch football, but like different athletes, and there's a basketball player too, it might have been Michael Jordan, who had, or Kobe or something, that had their version of the mode.
Yeah.
But I don't remember his detailed thoughts on it.
Okay.
But he's so interesting to me because we're into Avatar and this element shit. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
He calls himself the style bender.
Yeah.
And he was a dancer before he started fighting. And he started fighting really late. Like, he started taking martial arts classes when he was like 18 or something and became the middleweight champ at 29. And so he's also so funny and so lighthearted and so good at memes and so good at shit talking without it seeming cringy or ego driven. Like, he seems like he's shit talking for fun rather than shit talking to try to prove or posture. And so he just seems like a guy who's really got things figured out. And I always see him liking posts on psychedelic meme pages that I follow, like DMT World. Is like a psychedelic meme page, not just about DMT, but I always see him liking those memes, and I'm like, oh, you've tasted of the fruit, or whatever that phrase was that Uncle Iro used.
Yeah, tasted of the flower, I think is what it was.
Tasted.
Something about the flower. Maybe it's and you have tasted its fruit.
Something of the
flower and you have tasted its fruit.
No, it's something of the fruit and tasted its mysteries.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Eaten of the fruit and tasted its mysteries, or something.
That sounds right.
But Israel Adesanya strikes me as some kind of sage like that. He just he seems like he's explored consciousness and he's on a different level. And I of all of the UFC fighters, he's the one that I'm like, I want to ask that question too. What's the psychic element of fighting? What's going on mentally? I feel like he'd have insight into it.
Yeah, I agree. I thought about him a lot because of the God mode thing. And when I think of Israel Adesanya's God mode thing, I think of a thing from Dragon Ball where they call it Ultra Instinct, and it's like Goku can tap into a thing where he like his brain is turned off and he's no longer reacting. He just is constantly dodging everything, and he's not even thinking anymore because he's like zoned out. And I think of it like an ego death, emptying of yourself, and just sort of letting the universe flow through you, like letting God flow through you and just make all the decisions for you because you're just like tapped directly into the source or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think of Israel Adesanya the same way I think about like Goku doing that. And a lot of what he says reminds me of that because he does seem to emphasize like not being overly conscious of what you're doing. And he talks about setting the gaze and like when you're looking at somebody, he describes like kind of narrowing your eyes, but not like looking directly. You're not like looking directly at the person. You're just kind of, I'm looking at you, but I'm not like focused on you totally because I'm attempting to just perceive everything.
That's also the instructions on how to see auras, how to learn to see auras. Like that, soften your gaze and unfocus on the target.
Yeah. And
your eyes will be slightly more closed than normal, but not significantly.
He says narrow the eyes a little bit.
Just barely.
And to unfocus
it's not intentionally narrowing the eyes, right? It's just like soften your gaze in a way that will naturally lower your eyelids a little bit.
Yes.
But don't squint.
Yeah, and he like emphasizes like don't squint too much and don't do this too much. Like it's going to be somewhere in the middle. You'll have to practice this a lot, but with practice you'll be able to get it.
Yeah.
And he like references that like you want to be totally aware of your periphery and that you don't have to like look over at anything because you're aware of this like 160 degrees of vision or whatever. Which we talk about periphery a little bit because like I've heard something John Chang said was something about like how spirits can be seen more in your periphery.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess that lines up with what you're saying about like auras, like being less focused somehow allows for perception of things that you can't usually.
Because maybe that's what focusing is the cutting through of the noise to focus on what we call reality. It's like, maybe that's what focusing is. Focusing is like trying intentionally to cut through all of the informational and sensory feedback that isn't necessary to our immediate consensus reality that we're using right here. So it's like there's all these other things going on. I'm trying to ignore them by focusing on you. And if you just soften your gaze, it'll all start, a bunch of feedback starts coming in that you wouldn't normally see. You know what I mean? Like focusing on a certain element of sensory information.
Totally.
Like there's all sorts of things going on in this room that we're not paying attention to.
Yeah.
And maybe even extra dimensional shit going on in this room that we're just choosing not to pay attention to.
Yeah.
It might be a fun meditation exercise to do that, to practice not focusing on anything.
Yeah, I think so. He mentions like that he sees a difference between looking and perceiving, and that you shouldn't be looking, you shouldn't be attempting to look at anything in particular. You should just be trying to perceive what's in front of you.
Wow. It'd be really intimidating to be looked at like that too.
Yeah,
it's creepy. It's really creepy.
What are you looking at? It's not me.
Meet my eye line, Jim. Throws you off.
Yeah. So book 2 is a lot about the water scroll is a lot about actual sword fighting strategy. The third scroll, fire, is about like war, bigger combat ideas. And there wasn't a lot that I highlighted from that. The only thing that came to mind was like something I thought was kind of interesting was that he said that it was important to be aware of your surroundings, and he mentioned that like you always want to have the sun behind you. Always make sure the sun is behind you when you're in combat.
Interesting.
To not be looking in that direction. And if it has to be, have it on your right side. And I don't know why on the right side. Which, that must be just because he was right-handed, probably.
Yeah, so he'd be more likely to strike with his right hand and lean to his left? He
Yeah.
probably struck all different directions.
Probably. Yeah, it wasn't totally clear to me. But that was what the fourth scroll is about, sort of broader combat strategies.
I thought you said that was fire.
That's fire.
Oh, right. So you went through ground.
Ground, water, fire.
Okay.
This is the third. Did I say fourth?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
this
why I
is
was
the
trying to
third
keep
one.
track.
Yeah.
So then the fourth one is the wind.
Fourth one is wind, and wind is about other styles and where they're lacking. And that's where he sort of mocks the long sword guy and the short sword ninja characters, as well as other people too. But those are the main ones that were like characters in his life story.
Right. I bet Israel Adesanya thinks in that wind way. Like, he sees that and he's like, oh, those jiu-jitsu obsessed guys are like this, and these Muay Thai guys are like this, and this judo shit is like this.
Right.
And so he's... the term style bender, to me, like, it makes me picture him consciously and lucidly navigating all of these various styles without allowing himself to get stuck into any categories.
Yeah.
In the same way that a good musician should be able to do something that's a little poppy and a little rocky and a little rappy and navigate those styles and just like use a little of this, a little of that, and not like try to make some specific thing. It's like if you're great at fighting or you're great at music, period, you're not great at jiu-jitsu fighting or country music. You're just good at it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Is he undefeated? Is that right? I feel like I've heard that.
No.
No.
It's possible that he's undefeated in the UFC, but he was a long time kickboxer. So, could you Google that, Evan?
I got him on the Wi-Fi.
Oh, the Wi-Fi. Yeah, no Wi-Fi.
No. I can look it up on my phone, I guess, but you might as well.
But I do think there's a lot of like sound comparisons between the two of them. And I would venture to guess that he's read
undefeated
this.
in the UFC. He's 20-0
Wow.
in the UFC, but kickboxing, he got in some scraps. I can't even find his kickboxing record. That's funny. Oh wow.
Maybe he hadn't figured it out yet.
32-0 as an amateur, 75-5 as a professional.
Damn.
That's his kickboxing record. So he's professionally
Fucking
fought
good record.
over 130 times.
That's crazy.
Yeah, or 130 exactly.
But yeah, I bet that if he hasn't read this, that he would like this very much. That it would resonate with him very much. And the last scroll is Emptiness, and Emptiness is pretty vague and confusing. I think that it is about it's very short, and it's about like the idea of emptying yourself. I think it's about the same kind of God mode thing that we're talking about, like emptying yourself so that you can become something greater. That, like when you completely let go of yourself, you can become something different and more powerful.
Yeah.
But it's written in a strange way that like it's not totally clear to me what he means by it exactly. And there's like a thing that he says a lot at the end of like most paragraphs of this. He'll not most literally, but a lot of them. He'll say, "This should be considered closely," or "You should think about this a lot." Like, it seems like there's things that he understands. You're not going to get what I mean exactly. You're going to have to think about this for a long time before you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't get a lot out of the emptiness part, although there was something I highlighted because I just feel like I should share it in case it resonates with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's sort of the structure of those.
Cool.
So I'm going to read
What
a
an
few
interesting book.
excerpts from here.
Wow. So this book is like biography at the beginning, and then those 5 different sections.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, what a book.
This is near the end of. Oh, actually, wait. Let me do this first. This is on rhythm. Regarding rhythm and strategy. While in all things there is rhythm, the rhythm of strategy requires extensive training to master. The rhythms of the world are expressed in such things as the way of dance, and all these ways are capitalized. He refers to each of these as like the way of whatever thing. And the rhythms of wind and string musicians. In all these there is a harmonized and peaceful rhythm. Moving over to the way of martial arts, the shot of a bow, the firing of a gun, and the riding of a horse all have rhythms and timings. In all skills and abilities, rhythm is a thing that should not be ignored. Furthermore, there is also rhythm in that which is empty. Oh, and then one more rhythm thing here. In a battle of strategy, understand your opponent's rhythms, and have rhythms that your adversaries are unable to predict, the rhythms of emptiness, which proceed from the rhythm of wisdom, and victory will follow. So that there feels like he's saying that when you reach a certain point of wisdom, you're able to tap into a rhythm of emptiness that is unpredictable to anybody that isn't aware of it.
Wow.
Saying something like that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
This is at the end of the ground scroll, and it's sort of a summary. To those people who want to learn my strategy, there are these rules for practicing the way. Make your thinking free of evil. Train diligently in the way. Become familiar with all of the arts. Understand the way of all professions. In all things, discern profit from loss. Now, that there I feel like is something I honed in on that I feel like is a big part of what he's saying in terms of what the way is. In all things, discern profit from loss. So understand when something's going good and what you should do about that, and understand when something's going bad and what you should do about that. Understand when you're coming up and when you're going down and how to do that.
Yeah.
Learn to evaluate everything. Realize and understand that which cannot be seen. Probably emptiness, or maybe something more esoteric like the spirit world, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Notice even the slightest thing. Don't do things that serve no purpose. That's pretty cool. Don't do anything that's pointless. This is in the Water Scroll, I believe. Yeah, this is in the Water Scroll. So this is where he's been talking about sword strategy. And some of this I highlighted because I think some of the stuff in the sword strategy thing is interesting because it's about how to carry yourself, and like the gaze thing is in here.
Mm-hmm.
Mindset and strategy. In the way of strategy, your mindset should not differ from your everyday mind. In daily life or in strategic moments, without changing it even the slightest bit, make your mind broad and straight, without trying to rein it in tightly or letting it go slack at all, and in such a way that it does not lean in any particular direction. Center your mind exactly and set it quietly vibrating. You should investigate this exhaustively until you can sustain this vibration constantly and not allow it to cease for even a split second.
Could you read that again?
Mm-hmm. In the way of strategy, your mindset should not differ from your everyday mind. In daily life or in strategic moments, without changing it even the slightest bit, make your mind broad and straight, without trying to rein it in tightly or letting it go slack at all, and in such a way that it does not lean in any particular direction. Center your mind exactly and set it quietly vibrating. You should investigate this exhaustively until you can sustain this vibration constantly and not allow it to cease even for a split second.
Wow.
So that to me made me think of something that you and I have talked about. I don't know if it was on the show or not, but we talked about the idea of being sort of simultaneously in the Horus and Osiris mindset, and being able to
That's the broad and the straight, huh?
Yeah, being able to be totally present, but also at the same time aware of the big picture.
Yeah.
Being aware of the small picture of your story, but also being aware of the big story.
Yeah.
And somehow being in those two at the same time.
We kind of worded it last time, we were talking about that phenomenon, the Osiris-Horus consciousness last time, in the context of being simultaneously attached and detached. And so, are you thinking his broad and straight thing is like the straight is like the attached and the broad is like the detached?
Yes. Yeah, I think that straight is focused on what's going on, being present.
Yeah.
And I think the broad is understanding everything, understanding what's going on in the bigger picture, the way of things.
Right.
And
that's sick. A lot of subjects break things into the micro and macro too. That's kind of like that same pattern.
Yeah.
Like if you take a couple economics classes for an AA, you take a micro ec and a macro ec. Like, what's the little shit, what's the big shit?
Yeah.
You think about those both at the same time, then you get what's going on.
Totally. And it also reminds me a lot of meditation. It sounds like he's talking about reaching that state of true meditation, which when we talked about Nei Kung in episode 3, they discussed like that people, for the most part, when they sit down and meditate for a half hour, they're like really reaching meditation for very, very little of it.
Right.
Because your mind wanders so quickly. But if you can focus in, but also completely be unfocused at the same time, you reach a state that, according to John Chang, builds up chi in you and like powers you up in that way somehow.
Yeah.
I thought a lot that he is aware of chi. He does mention at one point when he's talking about footwork that your feet should move. He said something like yin feet and yang feet. Like you should never move the same foot twice in a row. They should be left, right, left, right, left, right. Just like yin and yang are constantly around each other or something like that. And he does make reference to something to the effect of that, like the world is made up of yin and yang. Like he seems to be aware of that and believes in that. And I think that he references. No, that's not right here. But he mentions like spreading the energy across your body and like making sure that your energy reaches all the way to your feet and that it reaches to all parts of your body. And it sounds to me like he's talking about the circulation of chi the same way John Chang and Costa Danos do.
Yeah.
They're talking about making sure that chi is circulated evenly through your body. John Chang even references that you should, if you're doing meditation, you should sometimes be meditating in a horse stance. You know what I mean by that?
Yes.
Because that allows the chi to flow through your legs. Otherwise, if you're always doing it sitting, your chi will get bogged down in your feet. It'll get bogged down in your legs if they're not being a little bit worked out while you're meditating.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that he was into chi. I think that some of the things he says about energy and controlling your energy, expanding or contracting your energy, I think that's what he's talking about.
Cool.
At quiet times, your mind should not become quiet, and when for some reason you are hurried, your mind should not become even a little rushed. Your mindset should not be affected by your body, nor your body by your mind. Pay close attention to the state of your mind, and do not worry about your body. Fill any places where your mind is lacking, but do not allow it to become overfull at all. While relaxing the surface of your mind, make its depths strong, not allowing others to discern your mindset. Make its depths strong. So it sounds like he's saying to like somehow mask what it is that you're thinking.
Right.
Which
God, that's so interesting. We were just talking about that fourth dimensional stuff, me and Brooke, the other day. As in, if someone didn't watch that episode and is watching this one, we were talking about how telepathy is potentially possible because there's an aspect of our consciousness that exists in the fourth dimension. So our physical body's in the third dimension here. There's a finer physical body in the fourth dimension that exchanges ideas and that we might be able to exchange in. If that's true, that fourth dimensional space of consciousness might have if you pictured it as a ball, I don't know what shape it would be, but someone who's a little bit perceptive might be able to hear a little bit. Someone who's more perceptive might be able to see all the way through it. And so you can think the thoughts that you don't want to be seen near the back of that fourth dimensional space, and think the thoughts that you want to be seen near the front of that fourth dimensional space, so that someone who's not as perceptive as you can't see through what you want them to see. They can't see what you're really thinking, and that's like, on an evil side, that's a master manipulator who can like look you in the eye like, dude, I just want you to get into the car that's going to be best for you. And you just can't see the schmeagle in there, but it's back there. And as someone who's more perceptive and can just read people, it's like, this guy's full of shit.
Yeah.
You know, and someone who's more naive or can't reach as far into that fourth dimensional space is like, well, I just see like what he's putting right here on the surface. Is like, wants me to get in the car that's best for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he might also be referencing, I think it might also be about the gaze thing, but like, he also references like, No, yeah, he's saying auras. They must be saying auras. He says something about how, like, when you look at somebody, when he looks at somebody in the correct way, he can see through them and he can see into their mind. He can, like, see into their mind and understand what it is that they're going to do. And he must be referring to,
Right.
like, the aura or the...
Well, that same strategy can help you see the aura, as is what he is saying can help you see into somebody.
Yeah.
And so the way I would interpret that is that there's many layers to the mind, but right now I'm just using like 2 of them. And these might be the wrong ways to talk about them, just doing my best. 3rd dimensional layer of consciousness, 4th dimensional level of consciousness. That 3rd dimensional level is activated when I'm staring at you and focusing on your physical person.
Yeah.
I'm purposely perceiving what your physical body is doing right now.
Yes.
And looking into your eyes. I'm telling, like, where are they looking? What's the affect of your face? You know, and reading the social situation.
Yeah.
If I soften them, I start to see with my 4-dimensional consciousness what's going on in the 4-dimensional space in this room, which encompasses the 3rd dimensional space and doesn't exclude me from seeing the way that you physically move,
Right.
but allows me to include in one like, what's the word for this?
Like, look.
One perspective.
Yeah, okay.
That's the right word. Allows me to see from a single perspective what's going on with you, both 3-dimensionally and 4-dimensionally. Your body's movements and the movements of your thought body, which is the aura. Like in like an electrical wire, it has a field around it that's an electromagnetic field that you can't see, and that it doesn't shock you or anything, but it exists in another dimensional space that your 5 senses can't perceive, but it is there. And in that same way, our physical bodies have a field around us that can be seen as the aura, and that exists as a finer physical body that's just us, but in a different dimensional space. And so you can see that and the physical body if you look at them 4-dimensionally instead of 3-dimensionally.
Yeah. Or I wonder if it might be like that it's that you can do either or if you focus correctly, you can do both. Like he mentions, like, don't be too far this way, don't be too far that way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like maybe it's like if you unfocus too much or like you do the thing too much, then you're only seeing aura, but you're not understanding what's going on physically anymore because you're just seeing that part.
Cool.
Maybe it's like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's some real Jedi shit he's doing.
Yeah. Honing your wisdom, you will recognize what is right and wrong in any situation, and understand the good and bad of everything, knowing every art and skill, and being familiar with every way. When you have achieved a condition where you cannot be tricked by anyone in the world in the tiniest way, that is the wisdom at the heart of strategy. Which kind of sounds like he's saying he could tell if anybody's lying, or he could tell exactly what somebody's going to do. He can predict everything because he's telepathic. He sounds like he's saying telepathy.
Yeah.
It sounds like he can read minds, basically.
Yeah.
It says comportment and strategy. So this is about posture. As for holding the body, the face should be tilted neither down nor up. It should not be scowling, and the eyes should not bulge out. Do not wrinkle your forehead, but set a crease between the brows so that you do not blink or move your eyeballs. Narrow your eyes a little, and soften your gaze placidly. The line of the nose should be straight, with a slight feeling of sticking out the chin. Straighten the sinews at the back of the neck, putting a feeling of energy into the hairline there. Thinking of the body from the shoulders down as being all of a piece, lower your shoulders and make your back straight, without letting your buttocks stick out. Extend your energy down from your knees to the tips of your feet, that's where that is, so that you do not stoop over at the waist. Expand your abdomen, thrusting it forward somewhat. That's how he describes how you should stand. And he makes it clear that, like, you should always be standing that way. That, like, it's important to him that, like, you walk around as a warrior. You walk around the same way that you would walk around if you were in the middle of combat.
Yeah.
It doesn't even seem like I feel like he doesn't like running. I feel like he's anti-running, that he feels like you should just be walking fast or walking slow, but in that same kind of rhythm.
Yeah.
This is where he talks about setting the gaze. In setting the gaze, make it large and set it broadly. There are two kinds of gaze, perceiving and looking. The gaze that perceives is strong. The gaze that looks is weak. To see faraway things as if they were close, and to see things that are close as though they were far away, is key in strategy. The setting of the gaze in small-scale strategy and in large is the same. Without moving your eyes, see both of your flanks. That is crucial. Things of this sort are very hard to figure out all at once under pressure. Learn what is written here, and make this your main everyday way of seeing. You should carefully refine this until your gaze does not change in any situation.
Wow. This would be so useful for Sean. Imagine a football coach trying to keep track of a field of players.
Yeah.
To not have to look around, but be able to have a soft gaze on the field and perceive he's over here, see the whole picture.
Yeah. And if you could like also tap into like sort of the telepathic stuff that he's having here, and you could like predict what is going on the field.
Perhaps even see the spirit of the team. You know, there's certainly a collective consciousness of a team that's influenced and contributed to by each member.
So like a group aura.
Yeah, a group aura. Yeah, I think you could pick up on that. I think a more experienced coach would have like a subconscious, natural, perceptive ability. You know, that people don't call it psychic because it's weird, but like, oh yeah, I can kind of pick up on that. That team ain't on their A game today. Mm-hmm. You know, and I can just perceive it. I can just pick up on it.
Yeah.
I think there would be a group aura like that.
I think so. Yeah.
To have one player who's super influential. You know, his parents are getting divorced, and it's just the whole team can feel it. He's just like, he's in chaos, and it's like
you can just see
one thing, that's one guy with this big influence, you know, and it's just bringing the whole group consciousness down.
Yeah.
It seems like a group consciousness would be like a pyramid, like in the same way that in an economy, you know, there's like one person who has 80% of the money, and then everyone else that like trickles down on this hierarchy pyramid. Mm-hmm. I feel like a group consciousness would work like that too.
Probably.
Like one person kind of guiding it, who's the leader.
Yeah.
And then,
I think about that quite a bit lately in terms of like I wonder sometimes if really successful people in whatever field are aware of something that they have to pretend that they're not aware of, or that they have to pretend doesn't exist. Like they're aware of some sort of, they're so successful at this because they're telepathic, but like they can't really explain that to anybody. It's just, you know, I just got a feeling about people.
Yeah.
I just got a feeling like that's It's funny that like that's acceptable to people. Like, just got a good feeling about it.
We just talked about that a little bit on Friday. Me and Brooke too, about the example I brought up was someone who's like, when my wife got in a car accident, I just had a gut feeling. You know, it's like, pause.
You're okay with that?
What?
You're okay with you're telepathic, is what you're saying.
Right. Or there's some sort of extra dimensional space in which there's a cord that connects you to your wife, and you can tell, and just like you can speak through a cup with a string between it. Like, they're a cup and you're a cup, and there's some string and there's vibrations that go across them, and you pick up, where is that string and what?
Right.
Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But someone who'd be interesting, like, to look into, a super successful person who's onto some shit and doesn't talk about it, Tom Brady. His wife is into, like, occult crystal manifestation shit, and I saw in an interview this lady, she's like, oh, I'm going to bring up some terms, and you say the first thing that comes to your mind, and she said Transcendental Meditation, and Tom Brady went, love it. Like, he had this like special, like, that's my thing, like, love it.
Wow.
And Transcendental Meditation is simple. It's not some crazy witchy shit. It's like you pick a nonsense phrase made of sounds that just sound nice but don't mean anything, don't have any concepts attached to them. Few syllables, and you repeat it. I just do it mentally, because I feel like the mental repetition allows me to more consciously express fourth dimensionally. Mm-hmm. Speaking subvocally, I feel like develops that, and so that's how I do it. I don't know if some people do it out loud, but when your consciousness drifts, bring it back to that mantra. You just do that repeatedly, and there's a transcendent result to that. I've
wondered about what it is. I felt like it wasn't. I felt like you have to like sign up for classes in order to get that. I didn't know that there was.
Right, and it'll cost about $980, but that's what Transcendental Meditation is.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just mantra-based meditation.
Yeah, maybe there's mantra-based meditation that's like, here's your mantra for peace, here it is for joy, here it is for abundance, here's all these different things, and it's in Sanskrit, and so it'll connect you to this ancient powerful thing, and you know it's not something like that. It's like, just pick some nice sounds, you know, and stick with them. bring it back there. And so it's super simple, but Jerry Seinfeld is one. He hasn't missed a day of Transcendental Meditation since the 80s.
Wow.
Yeah.
David Lynch. Have you seen Twin Peaks at all?
No. Why does David Lynch sound familiar?
Popular writer, director.
Okay.
But he made a show called Twin Peaks that I think is, I think it's truthful in ways that he has to pretend it's not.
Yeah.
I think it has really interesting stuff about like demon possession, but it's presented in this weird way for a network television show that like it's so strange when it pops up that like, oh, this character was possessed by a demon the whole time. It feels like it was a show that like started off in a very normal way, but then like he just kind of started putting more and more of the weird stuff that he's into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he's very into Transcendental Meditation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. This is using the feet. As for moving the feet, floating the tips of the toes slightly, you should tread firmly on your heels. Although depending on circumstances, there are large, small, slow, or fast strides, the feet should be used just as when walking normally. Flying feet, floating feet, creeping feet, these three types of footwork are to be avoided. And so I think he's talking about just like quick little step, like sort of running or like doing quick little steps or doing like fancy footwork to like mix people up or being sneaky. He thinks all of that is no good. You need to just be walking and you increase your rhythm or decrease your rhythm, but you walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't even know what that says. What did I write? Oh, sun at back. That's what it says.
Can I see it? I would think sunset back.
That's a mess. In discerning a place's bearing, there is what is called shouldering the sun. This means putting the sun at your back. If there is a situation where you cannot keep the sun behind you, you should try to keep it on your right side. When you are indoors as well, keep the light behind you or to your right, as just mentioned previously. Try not to allow yourself to be blocked to the rear. Keep space open to your left and keep your right closed off. At night, so you can see your opponents, keep fires at your back and light to your right when you position yourself. You should position yourself keeping the above in mind. You know what I think it is? I think part of it is that he, according to his self-portrait, he wore both of his swords on his left side. So it must have to do with that. But like that's the side that his swords are on.
You know what's interesting though is that the yin is the left and the yang is the right. The moon is the yin and the sun is the yang.
Okay.
So moon is left and sun is right.
Okay.
In yin yang philosophy. Also, if you were to compare open-mindedness and closed-mindedness, open-mindedness is left yin, closed-mindedness is right yang.
Yeah.
So he's saying keep the sun on your right, and then he's saying keep what's open on your left and keep what's closed on your right. And
that's interesting.
Those concepts philosophically line up with yin yang.
That's interesting.
doctrine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it might just be like the natural way of things, but who knows what the practical advantage was to doing that. Like.
Yeah. I think sometimes he speaks as though like his way of fighting is the objectively correct way, which is interesting because it's like only within the context of where you live. Like, why shouldn't that sword be slightly longer? Or like, are these the exact lengths? The swords that they've been making are the exact lengths that you need. I think. Yeah, what were we just talking about?
It sounds like the point is, given the context in which you're fighting, don't use a sword that's particularly short or long, because they each reveal a certain insecurity that you're trying to adapt it to what you fear. Like, but if you lived in a culture where swords tended to be this other length, that might be the way in that
makes sense.
context.
Yeah.
But also, swords were developed a certain length for a certain reason.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know why those exact lengths were picked, or like if there's some kind of ratio to your arm length or something like that. I imagine it's got to be something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He does mention that like make sure you use weapons that are proportional to your body. So that must have been a thing that they thought about. Yeah. I'll skip that. This is just the long sword and short sword stuff. Well, let me see. The reason for this is that, well, there are styles other than ours which have a preference for a very long sword. From the perspective of my style of strategy, I view this as a weak style. The reason for this is that these other styles of strategy, as they do not understand the principles that will allow them to beat a person no matter what the conditions are, think of the length of the sword as a virtue, and that it will allow them to beat an enemy from a distance. This must be the essence of why they prefer a very long sword. Many people say one son of reach counts, and I think that son is like a unit of measurement, so like it's like every inch counts, I think is what he's saying.
Oh, okay.
But this is the talk of those who don't understand strategy.
Oh, so he's saying size doesn't matter, it's what you do with it?
Yes,
That's very convenient,
that's
isn't it?
exactly what he's saying. Accordingly, because they do not grasp the principles of strategy, they take something long and try to win from far away. This is evidence of a weakness of heart, and thus should be viewed as a weak strategy. That's him mocking longsword people. And I'll read him mocking short sword people too. To think of winning by using very short swords exclusively is not the true way. Since long ago, the use of both the long and short sword have been clearly explained, calling them tachi and katana. In the world, there are people of great strength who can wield a very large sword as if it were quite light, so forcing oneself to prefer something short makes no sense, because these people can use long swords, as well as carry spears and naginata being the sort of katana spear. Taking a short sword and trying to cut a person in the intervals between his swings of the long sword, or trying to jump in, trying to grab him, and so forth, to rely on ideas like these is bad. Furthermore, looking for openings to attack is essentially to be seen as being on the defensive against everything. It has the feeling of becoming entangled and is something to be avoided. If using something small, you try to get in on your opponent and grapple with him or disarm him. When you are among many opponents, this idea is not useful. So it's not going to be useful if you're fighting multiple people.
Wow. It sounds like he's saying, like, so me and Garrett yesterday were talking about worshiping finite concepts versus worshiping the absolute infinite. And it sounds like he's just like saying not to get caught up on any finite philosophy of fighting as if it's going to be universally applicable.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
That's a lot of like what that scroll is about, is like, don't go too far down this way. That's not going to work.
Right.
What about this situation?
And just like the Ten Commandments say, don't construct a false idol and treat that like it's God. He's saying, like, don't put any finite fighting philosophy on a pedestal as though it's the fighting philosophy. It's not the way. It's not the way. You know. You see, kind of the connection I'm making is kind of abstract.
Yeah, and he does say something to that effect. Like he says, like, that you like fall off the way or something like that. That like you can, any of these things, when you get too obsessed with one style of fighting, this is not the true way. So he does say something similar to that. Yeah. This was the verse from Emptiness that didn't super resonate with me, but I want to just read it in case it resonates with anyone else. Correctly and clearly, taking the large ideas into your thinking, make emptiness your way, and you will see the way as emptiness. In emptiness there is good, there is no evil, there is wisdom, there is principle, there is the way. The heart is emptiness.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a nice poem, and it's something to think about, but I don't totally get exactly what he means.
Right.
But it must be...
It's like a Tao Te Ching passage where it's like, it makes me picture something that's feels healthy for my consciousness, you know? It, like, feels good. Then I couldn't turn around and explain what he said and what it meant.
Right.
But you just listen to it and it's just like, feels good.
Yeah, totally. And this is The Path Walked Alone. This is what he wrote in his last few days alive.
Hell yeah.
Do not ignore the many ways in the world. Do not seek after pleasures for yourself. Which he imbibed in prostitutes a little bit, but I'm sure he didn't follow all these rules all the time. He's learning.
Nothing's, it's all suggestion.
Yeah.
Nothing's concrete.
Do not rely on anything whatsoever. Think little about yourself. Think deeply about the world. Never in all your life think greedy or desirous thoughts. Hold no regrets about your personal affairs, meaning just don't regret anything you've done. No matter what, never be jealous of others. On whatever the path, do not be sad about parting ways. Do not complain about or blame either yourself or others. Do not allow your thinking to be led down the paths of romantic feelings. That's kind of like, these are for everybody.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't tell everybody to follow his way. But if you want to walk a path alone like a wandering Ronin, here's how you can do it.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a map to a place not everybody wants to go.
Right. Cultivate no likings for particular things. I think he means like don't get attached to a specific sword, don't get attached to any specific item.
Right.
Have no special wishes about your home. Do not have a preference for delicacies. Do not hold on to old equipment in order to pass it down to posterity. Regarding your body, do not avoid certain things for superstitious reasons. There was a note in here about that I read, and like the social context of that is something like don't like not eat pork because you're a Jew, or don't abstain from certain things for some spiritual reason that he doesn't.
Gives it too much power.
He thinks that's silly. Don't abstain from something for a superstitious reason.
Yeah.
Do not concern yourself with an unnecessary variety of tools, especially weapons. Along the way, have no bad feelings towards death. Do not seek to be rich in your old age. Buddha and the gods are to be revered, but do not make requests of them. Even if you must surrender your life, never abandon your honor. Always stay on the path of strategy and never stray from it. The end.
Cool.
That's some good samurai wisdom if you want to live like a samurai.
That's a cool ass book, man.
Yeah.
Good find.
Do you have any questions? Any comments?
No comments. I'm curious, like, how did the teaching on, he says, like, be intentional about every single thing that you do, how has that impacted you? Has that made you start thinking about, like, all right, am I walking in a way that's the most efficient use of my body?
Yes.
Am I, like, has that started to sink in? What's that like?
Well, just walking specifically, that like I start thinking about walking sometimes is like, I need to just walk with purpose. I remember, actually, specifically today, because I spent a few hours working on getting the notes ready for this today, and so I was rereading a lot of this, and especially while my head was in this, when I had to walk to my room for something, I walked with a different sort of purpose and walked in a very deliberate way.
Yeah.
And
that seems like a good practice.
Yeah.
Really good.
I think
good for your posture and just little practical stuff like that too, but that it would seep into, if you're at the grocery store, you're no, I'm going to buy this instead of that because this is purposeful and this is pointless.
Yeah.
Let's just, all those decisions that can just add up so quick.
Totally. And definitely posture. I've noticed that when I am thinking about him, my posture feels very good.
Yeah.
When I'm walking in that deliberate way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what was funny was, or not funny, but something I'm going to try is, one of the Edgar Cayce tips for developing extrasensory perception is to get a spinal adjustment. Literally go to a chiropractor and get your spine adjusted and get it straightened. And it didn't mention good posture specifically, but that can be assumed. But that sounds worthwhile. I was at some convention one time with Dan. I was at a golf convention, and there was a chiropractic lady who had me stand on a thing, and she's like, I'll tell you if you stand up straight. I'm like, fuck, stand up straight. And I sit on that shit so straight. She's like, all right, you're 65% on the right, and your spine is doing this and this, and she shows me a picture and everything. It's dude, I was so consciously trying to stand straight, but we aren't.
Wow.
Yeah, we're not. Our shoulders are different heights, so you can get it corrected.
Yeah.
And that has something to do with your chakras and energy centers and the chi flowing through your body in the right way and all that shit.
If your body is literally not aligned, it must affect your chakras should they exist.
Yeah.
Must.
Yeah. And even if, like, I'm always trying to explain things for a skeptic, you know, and if you accept the idea that there's an alignment between your body and your mind, like if your room's cleaner, your mind will feel a little cleaner. There's an alignment between your body and your mind. Your body being straighter probably has something to do with your mind being straighter and less biased.
Yeah.
Probably some connection there.
Yeah.
Even if it's not Hindu.
Yeah.
You know, there's something.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
yeah.
Well,
Cool.
You got anything
You
else?
want to walk very carefully back to our cars and get the fuck out of here?
Sounds good. Night school.
Night school.